Welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Edward Russell, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jay Shabat, to discuss the Paris Airshow and my recent interview with Alaska Airlines CEO Ben Minicucci. Enjoy. Hey, Jay, how you doing this Paris Airshow week?
Oh yeah, I'm fine. Following a lot of all the fun aircraft orders and all that fun stuff.
Absolutely. Well, I was showing my son the one of the flyovers at the show, and he very much enjoyed it. Though he thought the fighter jets were a bit too loud for him, but that's he's 4.5, so I give him that.
Very fun. Yeah, no, it's the kids love it.
Yeah. Well, listeners, neither of us are actually in Paris this year, but we've both been following it from afar. And the big news out of Paris, it's if anything, I'd say it's actually been fairly quiet Paris in terms of orders, except for the mega IndiGo deal for 500 A320neos, which we kind of all knew was coming. But that's really the only headline deal out of the show that in my sense, Jay.
Yeah, I think India was a big story. If you recall, 10 years ago at the Dubai Air Show, it was 2013. And the Emirates, that was where Emirates made the first really, really big 777X order. They ordered,
Yes.
have it on my screen here, some 115 of them. And then Etihad stepped in. They ordered 25. And then Qatar Airways ordered, what was it, 50, letter of intent for 50. And that was almost, that marked for me, it was symbolic of sort of the coming of age of the Gulf carriers. Here was that was the wow moment for everyone in the industry. Like, wow, these Gulf carriers are really super ambitious. And not to say they weren't growing very fast beforehand or hadn't, they had made very big orders beforehand. I think there were even the Emirates ordered a whole mess of A380s at that show as well. But it was that 2013 show where it just kind of crystallized everything. Well, I kind of feel like we're experiencing that same moment with India in 2023 at this Paris Air Show. So we had, as you mentioned, the just a bunch of big Indian orders. You had the IndiGo ordered. Help me out here. Was it? Let's see. Was it another 100 A321s?
Did they split it up? I just saw 500 A320neo family, but I don't know if they broke it down in any of the subsequent comments.
And I think the most interesting thing, I think it was all A321s, but more interesting was just the fact that it was indeed narrow bodies. They did not go in for any wide bodies, which some were, suspecting that they might, and they still might. In fact, it's perhaps more likely than not that they eventually will fly wide bodies. But for now, sticking to the narrow bodies. And then we had
That's
Air
right.
India. We had Air India confirm an earlier order. So I don't think anything new at the Paris Air Show, but I'm still going through all these orders, by the way, for our issue coming up, our Airline Weekly issue. You get to read all about the details coming up on Monday. But we have the Air India, and then Akasa, which is a newcomer to the scene. They ordered a handful of more 737s. So just all this Indian activity. And, people are asking the same questions as they asked in 2013 about the Gulf carriers. They're asking now, are the Indian carriers for real? Can they support all this? Is it overzealous? I think with the Gulf carriers, I think the answer was to a certain extent it was overzealous. I mean, I think a lot of that growth is never really did come to pass.
Doesn't
That's
help that the
another.
777X is about 5 years late at this point, but
I was just about to say that it's another discussion whether, these big aircraft delays, they kind of shape the discussion as well, but we'll leave that aside. But yeah, our Indian carriers, is that the next big thing?
I mean,
That's
it's
kind of what
really
it
a good
feels like.
question. I was speaking to IndiGo CEO Peter Elbers at the ADA AGM earlier in June, so this is before the big order. But even there, he was telling me that I asked him what his two biggest, or what his biggest concerns were, and he said, I mean, two of them were really the ability to sort of meet the growth expectations they forecast, and that one is getting the planes to fly it, and we've talked to ad infinitum about the supply chain issues with new aircraft, and the second was having the aviation infrastructure in India to support the growth. And I'm not an expert on India, but when I lived in Asia, and that was a decade ago, I mean, India had a big ambitions, but they certainly were not fulfilling the infrastructure needs at a rapid pace. Many of the big projects faced countless delays, especially compared to China. So I think that's still a big question. Can India build all the aviation capacity that they need to support two, 1,000+ aircraft on order at their two largest airlines over the next decade?
Yeah, I think that's a very big question. And to be clear, the India as a country has stepped up their infrastructure investment quite substantially. They are building a new, smaller airport in Delhi. It's mostly going to be domestic, from what I understand. And they are building a brand new airport in Mumbai as well. So it's, and a lot of smaller cities are getting new airports or upgraded airports. So some of that is coming. Now, will it be enough to support this, massive increase in capacity that these Indian airlines plan? We don't know. Now, there's, we can go on and on about wild cards and different factors that may shape this story going forward. It could be that some of the existing airlines that are maybe in, less financially healthy. SpiceJet comes to mind. Who knows what their situation is going to be? What if they were to disappear? Well, that creates the overall market that takes them out of the overall market. And
it takes them out, but then you have startups like Akasa is growing. They're not a huge player. They're not even as big as SpiceJet at this point, but they're growing. Jet Airways is still trying to relaunch. It's a competitive market, even though the players keep changing. And I would say it's probably one of the only markets where the players change as frequently as in India, for better or worse. But I asked Elbers about that, and he really described India as sort of a viciously competitive market, so especially for airlines.
Absolutely, and exactly where that all nets out at the end. The new airlines coming, the existing airlines that are growing, and the incumbent financially troubled airlines that perhaps will disappear. Where does that net out 5, 10, 15 years from now? Those are all interesting questions. I like to, just to conclude about. I like to think of, the Gulf carriers were sort of yesterday's growth story. Turkish Airlines is today's growth story. And Indian Airlines are perhaps the future growth story. And we'll see how it plays out.
Absolutely, yeah. No, and we're going to be watching this closely. It's you mentioned Turkish. That's one order that did not happen at Paris, though I don't think any of us were suspecting it. They're expected to order 600 aircraft, split between Airbus and Boeing, though their chairman would not tell me in Istanbul the exact split. But it's they're planning their own big event to announce their 600 order, and they skipped Paris for doing it. So there are more mega orders to come, that's for sure.
Yes, yeah. Turkish Airlines is still very much a growth airline, and as you mentioned, on the verge of a massive aircraft order in their own right. So yes, keep an eye out on them. So if I can maybe switch over, I have some data for our listeners here. I ran a list of the top airline shoppers, we should say, or the airlines with the most aircraft on order. And this is from Cirium's Fleets Analyzer. And don't take these numbers too literally. I just, kind of did a rough query here. And United has more aircraft on order than any other airline in the world. And I'm
counting, United, really?
Well, I'm counting options. So it's, yeah. Now, that's why I said be careful, just be, what they say, about statistics, you could torture the data enough. You could have them say whatever you want them to say, but no intention to torture data here. But if you want to listen, I do have the columns here, firm orders and options and letters of intent. If you just want to look at firm orders, then the number 2 on the list, IndiGo, becomes number 1. So they have 987 now on Airbus narrow bodies on firm order, and that may include some ATRs as well. I'm not sure if they still, but that they would be the number 1 in the world if you just include firm orders. So that's and that includes what we just were talking about, their big follow-up order in Paris. Number 3 on the list. And again, this is all firm now, 475 firm orders for Air India. They're number 3. And then I got number four is Air Asia. Now, a lot of that is options. Delta is very high on the list if you include options, Southwest. And even American. American has largely, they went kind of early in their fleet renewal. So they have
Yeah, I was gonna
fewer
say I
planes.
thought they were mostly done with their big
They
order book.
yes, and they're large, but remember they still do have some Airbus narrow bodies and 787 still coming. They have the XLRs on order, so they actually still
Ah,
have
yes.
175 planes on firm order. They're just such a giant airline that I guess at any given time they're going to have a lot of planes coming and going. So they are on the top 10 list, but yes, United is the one that's most aggressive right now in ordering new planes. And there's leasing companies, unless AirCap is number 9, Wizz Air is another one that cracks the top 10. Qatar Airways almost. So yeah, it's kind of all airlines of all shapes and sizes and leasing
Yeah,
companies.
but the list doesn't actually surprise me too much. It's sort of the usual suspects of
Yep.
orders. There's no single carrier that's like, wow, wait, like remember when Lion Air ordered 200 or 300 aircraft a couple of years ago, or it might have been 6 years ago now, but it's that was sort of a out there one. But yeah, the list doesn't surprise me a ton.
And by the way, the Cerium data does show our friends at Lion Air still have 423 planes on firm order. Now, again, and this is another reason why I say don't take this all literally. Aircraft order books are very fungible, and contracts they're they're not always terms of the contract are not always public, and side understandings are not always public. So we don't know that some of those planes from Lion Air may be maybe not they may never come to fruition. So just keep that in mind. But as you said, I
Exactly.
mean, there's really no huge surprises here. I mean, it's we can say with assurance that United Airlines is right now a very aggressive aircraft buyer, aircraft shopper. Uh, and that's certainly true of others on this list that we named too, IndiGo, Air India, et cetera.
And that's my mind immediately goes to all the capital those airlines are going to need to buy those planes.
Yeah,
United,
yeah.
of course, will has access to the EETC market, to secured aircraft bonds here in the U.S. Other carriers have less access to that, especially I think I don't know if India is signatory to the Cape Town Treaty, which governs the EETC market, but it's going to be interesting to watch. But that'll be for another episode in a few years once we have a better idea.
Yeah. Ned's getting a little bit in the weeds here on aircraft financing, but just in general, it does. The one thing about airlines is it's collectively the industry just has to finance hundreds of billions of dollars of these new things, new planes. They're not cheap. So where do you get the money? And there are different sources. Some airlines pay out of their own pockets. Singapore Airlines is notorious for, or they're known for, we made a lot of money last year. We got profits and money sitting in the bank account, so we can just pay for them in cash. You can borrow the money from banks. You can borrow the money from investors. That's what essentially one form of doing the latter is that WETC that Ned referred to. Now, the one nice thing about airlines when they borrow is that the aircraft, they're very valuable aircraft, they're very valuable collateral. So you can borrow easily against them. So yes, interest rates are going up, and yes, airlines are paying more for their capital, but it's they're a little bit more cushioned from some of the market forces because these aircraft are so valuable. A lender can come in, whether it's an investor or a bank or whoever, and come in and say, yeah, if you don't pay me back, I'll just seize your collateral and I'll seize your aircraft. I'll be happy with that because it's worth so much. So I'll give you pretty good interest rate. So no huge. It's not fine. There have been times in the past where access to financing has been a big issue for the industry. It's not really a huge issue right now, from what I understand. But I think we're going too far into
Yeah.
the weeds here on aircraft finance. But anyway, that's you can read more about that in the Airline Weekly issue.
Definitely. With that, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be back to talk about Alaska and what's happening in the Puget Sound. And we're back. So I had the opportunity to speak with Alaska CEO Ben Minicucci here in Washington, D.C. this week. And, he was very, I'll have to say, he was very on message, but, he gave some insight into the trends that Alaska is seeing. And he echoed the statements that some executives made at an investor conference a couple of weeks ago, that corporate travel remains sort of plateaued at the 70 to 80% level of 2019. So 75% on average would be a good way to put it. And they aren't seeing any step up or real change in that immediately. They could see that in the fall, but he would not go as far to say that they would. But he also said that it's a big opportunity, that when that business travel comes back, and he did say he expects it to come back at some point, that it's going to be a big upside to Alaska earnings. And, for the record, they are, right, Jay, they're already turning a profit again. So it's not like Alaska's still losing money. Like Hawaiian is the one I immediately think of. But yeah.
Correct. Yeah, they are. And just we can just throw the numbers out so our readers have context here. So Alaska, they did lose money in the first quarter, which is, for them, that's okay. I mean, first quarter, January, February, just really rough months for the Seattle market, and that's kind of where a lot of their business comes from. They have, pre-COVID, they were gonna kind of getting into the good habit of making money in the first quarter. But anyway, they're negative 5% operating margin in the first quarter, but for all of 2022, they made a solid positive 7% operating margin, which was on par with Allegiant, and it was ahead of Southwest, it was ahead of United, it was ahead of American. So yeah, they had a very, very nice rebound in 2022.
Absolutely.
They're doing
he
just
sees that
fine,
continuing this year.
Yeah.
Particularly with leisure travel. Leisure travel, as every other airline executive has said, remains robust this summer. Again, he wouldn't really comment on what he expects in the fall, but said even if there is a small slowdown, they're ready for it. So yeah, it was a very positive comments on at least the demand outlook and stuff.
Did you ask him about the transcon markets? That's one that I always was curious about. That may be a vulnerability for them.
I know that's a favorite for you, Jay. Unfortunately, that did not come up. I did get the chance to speak to Minakuchi a lot about the situation here in Washington, which is where Congress is currently debating the FAA reauthorization bill that comes up every 5 years. And Minakuchi was very on message with Airlines for America, saying that their focus is really, one, to expand the sort of air traffic control capacity, and that means hiring new controllers. There's a shortage currently, as well as investing in next-gen. He also joked that they've been calling for next-gen investment for decades, so not exactly terribly optimistic that that's going to happen, but that's their hope. Expanding the aviation workforce, pilots, addressing the pilot shortage, and then support for sustainability. And those were his three main talking points that he kept coming back to during our conversation. But one fun fact, and all Beltway insiders will be keen on this, is Alaska's come out against new slots for long distance flights at Washington's National Airport. The airport has a 1,250 mile perimeter, so they need a special slot exemption to do that. I asked him, Alaska could benefit from adding more flights to its West Coast hubs. They could also face competition. And he simply said, DCA is at capacity and they don't want to see more congestion. So that was Minakuchi's view on the hot debate here in DC over slots, even though, as he said, that's not really critical to FAA reauthorization. But yeah, that's where he stood.
Interesting. Yeah. And for those of you that follow me on LinkedIn, I ask a question. We kind of give an Airline Weekly question of the day and a little poll to get your thoughts. And this morning, I asked. By the way, we're talking. I guess we should always say the time we're talking. It's Thursday morning, June 22nd. And my LinkedIn post this morning was asking whether or not Alaska might in the future turn to wide bodies. And that's an interesting question. Right now they're an all narrow body carrier. I think they're just, I guess they have a few maybe Airbus narrow bodies lingering, inherited from their Virgin America acquisition.
If those aren't gone, they're supposed to be gone, I think, by the end of the year. It's very close. Yeah, it's imminent, if not already done. So
yep.
Yeah.
So soon they'll be all 737 with, I guess, some Embraer planes. I think the Q400s are gone, right? And
those are gone. Those are gone.
Mm-hmm. So it's very simple. Yeah.
Yeah, I for wide bodies, nothing imminent now, but Minakuchi did speak to the MAX 10, which is still pending certification, and Alaska is eager to get some of those aircraft. He talked about up to 50 MAX 10s, And at some point, they haven't firmed that up or anything. And he talked about just the economics, that for essentially the same capital costs, they get another 12 or 15 passengers versus the max 9, and that really works well for their network, especially with Seattle being a constrained airport. Flying more seats on each departure just helps drive more revenue to their bottom line.
I was just going to say that 10's probably going to be a good aircraft for them because the economics on the extra seats, as you mentioned, are excellent. The risk, of course, is that you're not going to be able to fill the seats, and you're going to if you fly them around empty, it's not going to do anybody any good. But I think in their case, because Seattle really has serious congestion problems at the airport, with no, as far as I understand, there's really no viable way to expand that airport. I mean, just given the land constraints and whatnot. So it'll, that's you see this. You see a lot of this in Asia, where you have these very congested airports. And so, a Japanese airline will fly, wide body aircraft on domestic routes, even though it's totally not not optimally designed for that. They'll do it because they just have more demand than the airport slots can accommodate. So
fun fact on that. The only domestic flight in Japan I've ever taken was Tokyo to Takamatsu in sort of their inland sea, and it was a 787-8, and I'm like, this is awesome. After you give me, I'm on an hour flight and I get a whole 787, and I mean it was a full flight, I have to say, but yeah, it's something you don't generally see here at home in the U.S.
Yeah, and if you recall, Boeing originally, very early on in the 787 program, when it was still 7E7, they called it. They actually had a -3 version along with the 8 and the 9s, and now they have a 10 as well. And that -3 was specifically designed for the Japanese airlines. So it was basically taking that 787 and optimizing it as best as possible for those, short stage length Japanese domestic and short haul markets. Boeing ultimately never, they scrapped that idea because of, even though the Japanese carriers are very important customers, with all the the production delays and complications and all that, they scrapped the idea. But a little bit of a little jog down memory lane there.
Yeah, well, didn't Boeing back in the day offer the Japanese airlines a modified 747-200 that was designed basically for short flights? I guess less fuel, and
that's going way back. Well before I would say the 70s, 80s, or something like that. Yeah, is that what they are? That's well before even my time.
No, the SPs were the short one that flew longer flights. I swear that there was a high density modified, but I could be Wait, but it was before both of our times. That's for sure.
Yeah, nice. Well, we got to keep things more in the present here, so our memories are fresh.
Yep. Well, Jay, that is another Airline Weekly Lounge. It was fun to chat about Paris and my chat with Alaska. Listeners, you can reach myself at er@skift.com. You can reach Jay at js@skift.com. Thanks again, Jay.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Ned. Thanks, everyone. And follow us on LinkedIn and make sure to read Airline Weekly.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Airline Weekly Lounge podcast. Check out airlineweekly.com for a new issue every Monday and updates on the latest airline news throughout the week.